Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. This is the Committee on Education. Today's date is February the 9th. The time is 2:00 p.m. and we are in conference room 309. We have little over a dozen bills on the agenda, actually less than a dozen bills on the agenda today. But first, we're going to have Vice Chair Capella go over housekeeping. Vice Chair Capella.
Here's the quick housekeeping rules. In order to allow for as many people to testify as possible, there will be a 2-minute time limit per testifier. So please keep yourself muted and your video turned off while waiting to testify and after your testimony is completed. The Zoom chat function will allow you to chat with the technical staff only. Please use the chat only for technical issues. If you are disconnected unexpectedly, you may attempt to rejoin the meeting. If disconnected while presenting testimony, you may also be allowed to continue if time permits. Please note the House is not responsible for any bad internet connections on the testifier's end. In the event of a catastrophic network failure, it may be necessary to reschedule the hearing or schedule a meeting for decision-making. In that case, an appropriate notice will be posted. Please refrain from any profanity or uncivil behavior. Such behavior may be grounds for removal from the hearing without the ability to rejoin. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Okay, first up, we have HB 11, Board of Education, culturally relevant, historically accurate performance standards and curriculum. First up on our testifiers list, we have the Department of Education providing comments. DOE.
Good afternoon, Chair Woodson, Vice Chair Capella, and members of the committee. I'm Terry Ushijima, Interim Assistant Superintendent with the Department of Education, testifying on behalf of Superintendent Christina Kishimoto. The department stands on its written testimony and offers comments on sections 2 and 3 in House Bill 11. The department appreciates the legislature's desire to ensure non-discriminatory and equitable education for all students. It is a high priority for the department as well. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm available to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Next, we have Together for Keiki testifying in support. We also have about a half a dozen individuals all providing testimony in support. Is there anyone else wishing to provide testimony on this proposal? Seeing or hearing none, moving on to our actually members. Is there any questions?
Chair,
Okay.
I have
Please
a
go ahead.
question for the DOE, please. As a representative from the DOE, I just had a question. I saw your testimony and I appreciate the input. Do you currently feel that the department has concerns or currently have an issue with this type of curriculum being in the school system at this time?
Vice Chair Capella, thank you. And I'm really sorry. I'm pressing my start button for my video and I tested it earlier. So oh, there we go. Thank you. Yes. So the question was whether we have concerns about our current curriculum.
Let me repeat the question. This is Representative Okimoto, by the way.
I'm so sorry.
No problem. So my question, I guess, do you have concerns with this type of curriculum being currently in the system where we have issues with discrimination and other elements of the bill? Because I wanted to know if you feel that this type of legislation is necessary at this time in the DOE for standards-based curriculum.
I think that we are committed to do this without legislation. When we create our standards, it goes through a process that is reviewed and it is approved by the Board of Education. For our curriculum, we are taking further measures to ensure that there's greater consistency with the criteria at which curriculum and instructional materials are being selected. So this is a very high priority for us. So whether there's legislation or not, we will continue to put into place procedures to ensure that we have curriculum and materials that are non-discriminatory and provide multiple perspectives and diversity.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rep. Members, any other questions? Vice Chair Capella.
Once again, Ms. Ushijima, So I guess kind of following up on Rep. Okimoto's question, but actually following the fallout of the Acellus online learning platform, which was found to be racist, sexist, and historically and scientifically problematic. What steps has the DOE taken in order to ensure that all of its curricular materials are non-discriminatory and historically and scientifically valid?
So we have done an expedited review process to identify another solution or option for schools to use for the remainder of this school year for the Acellus program. And at the same time, we are putting into place a state system to review curriculum and instructional materials that will have consistent criteria whether the curriculum is being reviewed at the state level, complex area level, or the school level.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, can I ask one quick follow-up question to the DOE?
Sure, go ahead.
About
Okimoto.
approximately how long does it take for you to vet a program similar to Acellus?
The expedited process was not the usual vetting process. It was really a necessary step that we had to take. So that took about a month, I would like to say. And normally I think it may depend it might depend on what information is available, but it is a process that takes time. Usually what happens is you convene a team together that consists of teachers and others who have areas of expertise, and you use set criteria, and that's reviewed, and we ask for stakeholder feedback within the community. So, it can be done at the school level, the complex area level, or the state level. So the time would vary. When we did a statewide review of our ELA program years ago, that was a very extensive program review. So that took a long time.
So would a conservative number be 12 to 18 months? That's what I hear. I mean, if we're looking at pre-K, K through 12 to vet at every grade level, something similar to what the Acellus program is right now, I heard conservative numbers would be 12 to 18 months. Is that true? I could imagine it being longer if we're doing K through 12.
I have some content specialists in the room with me, and it may not take that long, but normally it's more grade level specific at the elementary, middle, or high school. And to do a K-12 approach is more complicated.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So for the Department of Education, you did say, in fact, that the Acellus program, our curriculum, was in fact approved by the Board of Education.
I know that the Board of Education approves our standards, and our standards basically are descriptions of what students are expected to know and be able to do at a specific grade level. The curriculum, on the other hand, is academic content that's taught in schools that help students meet the standards. And the curriculum includes lessons, instructional practices teachers use, activities, assignments, and projects.
I apologize. I actually asked about Acellus, not standards. So was Acellus approved by the board, or who approved that?
The Board of Education did not approve Acellus.
Okay.
And schools have the choice of selecting curricular materials, and they had options to select from, and Acellus was one of those choices.
Okay, thank you for that. And so how many schools, if you can give like a rough percentage, move forward with choosing Acellus as online curriculum?
I can get you the exact number, but I'm thinking that it's a handful of schools that are selecting to switch to another curriculum this semester.
And thank you. Our understanding is that at the beginning of the pandemic, most schools, in fact, utilize Acellus for their online curriculum platform. And at least to me, that's grossly problematic because it did have highly offensive information in that curriculum that was disseminated to our kids. And so I think that's some of the rationale behind this. You have any comments on that?
Yes, I agree that it was very problematic, and we are working on that review and instructional materials process so that we avoid any future situations that are similar to this. We are very concerned about having high quality instructional materials for our students.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Members, any other questions? Okay, go ahead, Representative.
Good afternoon, Ms. Ushijima. In an article kind of widely commented on by Civil Beat in November of last year, you mentioned the position of curriculum specialist. Can you explain what a curriculum specialist is and the work that they might do?
We have educational specialists, and we have a designated educational specialist for some of our different subject areas. They help to guide our state work in regards to standards, development, implementation, and support for schools. In addition to that, they work with complex areas to provide capacity building and professional development, and also work on goals that are included in our state plans, our state strategic plans.
I guess what I'm getting at is it seems like a comprehensive and intentional position that's created by the DOE. So how did something like this happen? How did something like Acellus get through a curriculum specialist with these various levels of oversight and interaction with other forms of the department?
I'm not quite positive exactly what had happened. I've been here since November. I know that the Acellus program initially was more widely used for the secondary programs, largely for credit recovery. And when it became a need for schools to have a distance learning option, Acellus also had an elementary option available. So I think that was one of the options that schools were able to provide to meet the needs of the families given this situation.
Could it happen again?
We are putting the processes in place so it doesn't happen again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Donovan. Members, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, moving on to HB 608, Board of Education and Community Forums. We have a couple pieces of written testimony from the Office of Informational Practices providing comments, Board of Education providing comments, Civil Beat Law Center providing comments, League of Women Voters in support, and 2 testimonies from individuals, both in support. That's all we have. And since there's no one here, we will move on to the next bill. HB 611, Department of Education and Maintenance of Effort. First up we have is charter schools providing comments. They are not here. We have the Department of Education in support. Steele E. present.
Aloha, Chair Woodson. It's Superintendent Kishimoto, Vice Chair Capella, members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to give comment. This is Superintendent Kishimoto of the Department of Education, and I stand in strong support of HB 611. This legislation is of utmost importance in solidifying Hawaii's commitment to equity and empowerment for all public school students. Our school leaders rely on adequate and predictable funding to provide innovative learning opportunities. Stable funding will provide our schools with the security they need to implement programs as student needs and aspirations evolve without the worry of budget cuts and the need to decrease fundings. A Hawaii maintenance of effort commitment will ensure educational funding remains constant from year to year, providing for comprehensive student supports and preventing drastic educational inequities among students. The enactment of this legislation will ensure a high-quality public education system that is supported and funded by our state with adequacy, equity, predictability, and stability. These are 4 non-negotiable components that are stated by the National Conference of State Legislatures. I am excited about this legislation and thank Chair Woodson and the Education Committee for introducing this bill. Chief Financial Officer Brian Hallett and I are standing by if you have questions.
Thank you, Dr. Kishimoto, for being here. Next, we have Tax Foundation of Hawaii providing comments. Tax Foundation here. You are actually on mute. If you can unmute yourself, please. We still cannot hear you. Okay, we're having technical difficulties. If you will please try to rejoin, sir, and we will come back to you. We can see you, but we cannot hear your volume. Thank you. Moving on to Hawai'i Coalition, providing testimony that provides comments. Hawai'i Coalition.
Yes, aloha Chair Woodson, Vice Chair Capella, and members of the committee. My name is Sherry Nakamura, Director of Hawai'i Coalition. We would like to comment on HB 611. Hawai'i fully supports the concept of long-term stable funding for public education. A state maintenance of effort law could help ensure consistent funding so that schools can execute their academic plans with minimal disruption. We have comments on the Public Education Stabilization Fund proposal. We suggest that rather than calculating a year-on-year difference of the entire state education allocation, the comparison be narrowed to EDN 100, school-based budgeting, and EDN 150, special education funding. The reason is we want to stabilize funds where it impacts the students the most, which is in the classroom. In addition, we are not comfortable with a special fund in which the DOE would have full discretion without transparency and accountability, the 2 tenets for which the coalition consistently advocates. Thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you so much for being here. Okay, we're going to go back to the Tax Foundation for Hawaii to see if they are available to provide their testimony. Please go ahead. We still unfortunately can't hear you. Well, we do have your written testimony and thank you for it. And we're going to move on to other individuals. So we also have testimony from Budget and Finance providing comments. We have HSTA providing testimony and support. Kamehameha Schools providing testimony and support. Democratic Party of Hawaii Education Caucus providing testimony and support. And 1 individual testimony also in support. Members, are there any questions? Oh, yes, we can hear you and you were able to. Oh,
Yes, HSTA would like to testify on this bill.
okay, please go ahead.
Thank you. Chair Woodson, members of the committee, HSTA does support HB 611, but we are offering certain amendments. First of all, We support the idea of trying to stabilize education funding in the state. We have seen in the last 10 years the proportion of the DOE budget steadily decline. And you will see that from fiscal year 14, it was 23.1% of the budget. Now to fiscal year 23 is only 19.7% of the budget. That change represents nearly $234 million in funding. And we do believe that this trend will continue, that we will see over a period of time, less and less money going as a proportion of the state budget to education. The second provision says basically that if the fiscal dollars decrease over a year, that the special fund will be used. Our concern is that the section 302A would allow a temporary suspension of this MOE. We would like that part to be deleted, specifically because when we've included in chart, in good years, we've always seen an increase in funding. While that may not be proportional to the overall budget and is not keeping up with general funding altogether, the consumer price index, if we take away the idea that it can be temporarily suspended, that anytime we have an economic recession where we need that money and it can be suspended, then it makes the bill meaningless. So if we really want to shore up education funding, we would ask that 302A be suspended. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else wishing to provide testimony on this particular proposal? Mr. Yamachika, do you want to try one more time from the Tax Foundation? Okay, we don't have you. Thank you. Members, questions? Questions? Vice Chair Capella.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a question for the DOE, either Superintendent or Mr. Hallett. It seems, I'm a supporter of this bill, but it seems like the real intent of this bill is to close the gap between the DOE's budget allocations and the state's general fund increases in both good economic times and in bad. Is that correct? And if so, can either one of you speak to how that gap has really widened over the past decade, specifically in education?
Hi, Vice Chair Capella. This is Brian Hallett, CFO for the Department of Education. I think Corey Rosenlee's testimony spoke to it pretty well. Those numbers are consistent with what we've seen. Proportion of the state budget going to support public education has been in decline over the past decade. As cited, approximately 23% down to about 19%. So what we're really afraid of is further disproportionate reductions to the education budget. It is generally accepted as a high priority area. So it does seem incongruous with priorities to see disproportionate reductions to education funding.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Members, any other questions? I have a couple questions for Department of Education to piggyback on the previous inquiry. So for Dr. K or CFO Hallett, are there any other states or jurisdictions within states that have a maintenance of effort provision in their rules or their statutes that you're aware of?
I don't have that with me.
Chair Woodson, we do have a response from Education of the States, a report from them that we can forward to you for the committee. And we also have a response from the Council of Great City Schools from the district perspective. I don't have that list in front of me, but I will provide the report I requested from both of them and their response to you in the committee within a day.
All right, thank you for that. And so it's already been mentioned that there seems to be a downward trend of funding allocation as it relates to the Department of Education. Is that what the DOE believes is happening?
Yes. In looking at the budget proposal before the legislature this year, it does appear that trend would be continued with, in particular, looking at the budget in brief and seeing the reductions that are being contemplated for education in relation to the total state budget. I think something that we've been struggling to communicate over the course of this session has been the compounding impact of the $100.2 million non-recurring reduction from the current year, that in carrying that over is just making the challenge even greater. we've been looking at up to 22% reduction in our support for this year. Fortunately, there was news today, which was just really re-announcing what had been discussed in previous week about reducing that reduction, restoring some funds to education in the governor's budget proposal. But we are still looking at $141 million gap in funding or reduction from what we would think of as our base budget.
Thank you for that. And the most recent ESSER funds that came down from the federal government, the elementary and secondary schools emergency relief funds, has actually a maintenance of effort provision in that law. Can you briefly go over what that maintenance of effort provisions or that those provisions are?
So I think the one that you're referring to says that state support in fiscal year 22 shall be maintained at the same proportion, or that the state shall give assurance that it shall be maintained at the same proportion as budgeted or expended in fiscal years 17, 18, and 19.
Yes. And I assume I understand the intentions behind that provision, but do you receive any directive from the United States Department of Education as to why they recommended including that in this last round of ESSER funding?
We haven't seen guidance yet on what the intent was, but it would seem they were anticipating or concerned about that idea of disproportionate reductions against public education, in particular in light of the provision of federal assistance targeted towards education, and perhaps fearing that states would be essentially offsetting reductions in the total budget. What I'm hearing is in other jurisdictions, other states, that's not happening, and perhaps it's not happening because of that provision.
Thank you. So the ESSER funds, it's specific to this current fiscal year, but it doesn't apply to fiscal years thereafter. Is that correct?
Correct. It only speaks to fiscal year 22, which would be for next year or the first year of the biennium currently before the legislature.
Okay, thank you. Members, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, moving on to HB 619, Department of Education and Ethnic Study Curriculum. We have Department of Education providing comments.
Thank you, Chair Woodson, and good afternoon again to the members of the committee and Vice Chair Capella. I'm Terry Ushijima, Interim Assistant Superintendent with the Department of Education, testifying on behalf of Superintendent Christina Kishimoto. We stand on our written testimony and provide comments to HB 619. The department currently has an ethnic studies course within social studies. Students earn a half-credit elective credit towards graduation. This course examines the dynamic interactions among various ethnic groups in American society. Imposing the requirements contained in this measure may have the unintended consequences of limiting innovation in school design, as well as preventing students from enrolling in other elective courses such as fine arts, world languages, and computer science. We urge the legislature to be mindful of these potential impacts. Thank you for this opportunity to testify on this measure, and I am available for questions.
Okay, thank you for being here. That's all we have on our testifiers list that is able to testify via Zoom. We also have individual testimony from 3 individuals, all testifying in support. Members, are there any questions on HB 619? Representative Gannigan.
Afternoon again, Ms. Ushijima. Can you explain further how the elective process works for these fairly wonderful and essential programs that are offered to students?
The students have elective courses that they can select depending on their interests or their aspirations on their future careers post-secondary. So ethnic studies may be one of the choices that students may select from.
I also noted that computer education courses is an elective as well, is that right?
Yes.
How would, I'm trying to discern why the department is in support of the bill that we're going to be hearing right after this, which is the computer education course, but not in support of this one.
So the computer science bill is geared towards providing students with the opportunities and having those opportunities available at the school level. So the school students will still have choices in terms of what they want to pursue, depending on their interests and their future plans.
All right, I'll reserve maybe a line of questioning for the next one. Thank you. Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, moving on to the next proposal, HB 1222, Department of Education and Computer Science. First up, we have DOE, OSID, testimony and support.
Okay. Good afternoon. Once again, Terry Ushijima, Interim Assistant Superintendent with the Department of Education, testifying on behalf of Superintendent Christina Kishimoto. We stand on our written testimony and support with comments on HB 1222. In alignment with the National Definition for Computer Science, the department recommends using the definition for computer science by Alan Tucker from the K-12 Computer Science Framework. In addition, the reporting requirement for complex areas to submit their computer science status report to the superintendent can be achieved through the tri-level governance and efficiencies to relieve the reporting burden on our complex area superintendents. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for being here again. Next, we have code.org providing testimony and support.
Aloha, Chair Woodson, Vice Chair Capella, and members of the committee. I'm Katie Hendrickson. I work for Code.org as Director of State Government Affairs. We are a nonprofit that works to ensure that every student has the opportunity to learn computer science in their K-12 school. We've worked with a regional partner in the state of Hawaii, STEMworks, and local facilitators to provide professional learning for over 1,000 elementary teachers, 55 middle school teachers, and over 20 high school teachers for AP Computer Science in the state of Hawaii. Now, the state has made incredible progress with high school computer science courses and expanding access, but many elementary and middle schools still don't teach this critical subject. And without those early opportunities to learn it, the number of students and the diversity of students who opt to take it in high school is not going to increase. And at the same time, we see that computer science is a really key economic driver for diversifying the economy in the state. Hawaii has averaged over 1,000 open computing jobs each month over the past year, even during this economic downturn that we've seen. So there is a clear need for computer science to prepare students for that workforce. I want to comment quickly on the part of the bill that would create the fund for private industry to donate into. There are several states that have funds like this in legislation. Washington, for example, requires a one-to-one private match for their public funding. They have a $1 million per year grant program for computer science, and the state has successfully received $6 million from private industry over the past 6 years to supplement their $1 million per year from the state. Other states have community funds that provide industry support for their Department of Education plans around computer science. Basically, we believe that this legislation is absolutely important for providing students with those early opportunities to learn computer science, and we definitely support the bill. Mahalo.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have testimony support from Hawaii Kids Can.
Aloha, Chair. Can you folks hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair Capella and members of the committee. The legislature and Governor Ige sent a strong message with the passage of Act 51 in 2018. 3 years later, Hawaii has made tremendous progress offering computer science at the high school level. And yet we know that early exposure is critical with closing the ethnic and gender gap in technology. That is why we need HB 1222, since it ensures our Keiki elementary and middle school will build a strong foundation to lead Hawaii into the future. Research shows that these early years are where children build a belief about what is possible in their lives. For a child who has never known someone who has worked in the STEM fields, early exposure will give her the confidence that she can thrive as an innovator. That's why HB 1222's commitment to quality data matters as well. Lastly, the special fund will enable major local and national technology companies and funders to put some skin in the game, and there is early interest. This is similar to the grant program set up in Georgia and their effort to make Georgia the tech capital of the East Coast. Given the budgetary challenges facing our state and schools, this targeted financial investment from private partners will deliver a strong return on investment. Companies including Google, Facebook, Amazon are among those that have already committed $300 million nationally to support computer science. So we believe HB 1222 is an important opportunity to show the nation and the world that Hawaii is committed to diversifying our economy and becoming a leader in computer science education. Mahalo.
Thank you so much for being here. That's all I have on my testifiers list. Is there anyone else here who can provide testimony on this bill? Seeing and hearing none, we also have testimony from charter schools in support, Budget and Finance providing comments, Chamber of Commerce of Hawaii in support, Microsoft Corporation in support, Purple Ma'ai Foundation in support. Individuals, we have about 9 individuals all providing testimony in support. We also have TechNet providing testimony in support. Members, any questions? Okay. Rep. Ono.
Thank you, Chair. Question for code.org, Ms. Hendrickson. Good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for joining us. I just wondered if you can give us the 30-second spiel on some background on computer science. I was very fascinated to learn that computer science isn't just coding, but rather a series of critical thinking skills. For the members' edification, could you just give us like 30, 45 seconds on the way you define computer science?
Yeah, absolutely. And this, I think, is super critical for the early ages as well. Computer science is really about how to think like a computer. Really, if you think about it as computational thinking, that's what we're teaching the youngest kids in elementary and middle school. They are learning how the internet works, how it sends messages from one device to another. They're learning why strong passwords are strong, what makes them strong, and why they're important, because how easy it can be to guess a weak password. They're learning how to follow instructions and how to sequence events. That gives them the skills to create computer programs, basically creating directions that a computer can follow. That was my 30-second spiel.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Representative. Any other questions? Representative Gannigan.
I think history teaches us that, Ms. Hendrickson, good afternoon, evening. I think history teaches us that coders can come in very young ages. And what kind of ethics are built into a potential curriculum for students? So what I'm thinking about is what kind of discernment will we be talking about with students with regards to a flood of information coming at them, how to think, not just like a computer, but how to think like an ethical and engaging on the internet.
Yeah, the Hawaii Department of Education has K-12 computer science standards that are based on and used to inform the standards from the Computer Science Teachers Association and the K-12 Computer Science Framework. And those have ethics and accessibility and understanding diverse perspectives and a variety of computing practices that are important. There's also, somewhat related to this, educational technology standards as well that provide more of that digital literacy and looking at media and consuming it and being critical thinkers. So together, those educational technology standards and those standards around computer science really together get at what you were asking about.
Thank you. Thank you. Members, any other questions? I have a quick question for Hawaii Kids Can. So several
Go ahead,
testimonies.
Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. So several testimonies have indicated that the Department of Education is moving forward at a pretty good pace with regards to setting up computer science curricula within the DOE schools, but you still believe this is a necessary next step. Can you please expound upon why you believe it's necessary that we continue to move this bill forward?
Absolutely. Anecdotally, speaking with computer science teachers at the middle school and elementary levels, they're very clear that while they feel like they have made great strides, the same can't be said kind of broadly across the entire state, and certainly not within their complexes. The Department of Education has invested, quite heavily in building that time for professional development and working with organizations such as Computer Science Teachers Association, HISTE, and others. Even this last weekend, there was a computer science virtual PD conference. So we know that this is happening, although at the same time, when we hear those stories from elementary school teachers, and I believe there is some data already, and Katie would know this better than me, that at the elementary level, it's still getting lost. And I think there is at times confusion over what quality computer science looks like. For example, I know that there have been some cases in the past where classes such as keyboarding are being counted as computer science, or even activities in digital media. And again, according to those K-12 standards, that is not really the appropriate definition of computer science. So I think it is a way to help ensure that there is quality across the board equally for many kids.
Okay, thank you so much. Members, any other questions? Seeing none, moving on. Vice Chair Capella.
Continuing on in the hearing, House Bill 1294. Up first in opposition, Department of Education, CFO Hallett.
Hi, this is Brian Hallett, CFO for Department of Education. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. Department is opposed to this bill. We're currently in the first year of implementation for a new allocation methodology using a weighted student formula like allocation methodology for our special education resources that support classroom positions. So this is what this bill is addressing or speaking to, the SPED per pupil allocation program. We would just note three things: that the bill as proposed would be inconsistent with the method of distributing resources based on a single point in time enrollment projection. Number two, there already exists a mechanism to address extraordinary circumstances that may arise, as this bill seems to be seeking to address, where 10% of resources are allocated to the complex area superintendents to be distributed at their discretion to support special education. So that's one major way in which the concerns or issues raised in this bill could be addressed. And the third point is, given that we're only in our first year of implementation, we've already had 2 rounds of holding work groups to inform the structure of this program. And we intend to have our 3rd series of meetings, much like the Committee on Weights, what we call it the Fiscal Allocation Work Group. They will be meeting over the summer, and that seems an appropriate venue to work out some of the kinks in this very new program. So thank you for the opportunity to testify in this measure.
Thank you for being here. We are going to take a quick recess. We're having some technical difficulties. Recess, members. Continuing on with our hearing House Bill 1294. The only other person we have testifying here on our Zoom list is an individual in support, Alex TC. Alex, are you there?
Yes, Vice Chair Capella, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Chair Woodson, Vice Chair Capella, committee members. My name is Alex Teese. I'm the founder and CEO of Dreamhouse Eva Beach Public Charter School. I appreciate seeing this bill today. Speaking with my charter school leader hat on, our school was significantly underfunded last year. So I feel like this bill, while it applies to many schools, specifically charters for children who are coming with special needs from the DOE to charters, we were severely underfunded this past year. And I see that this bill directly remedies the situation that we found ourselves in. This bill doesn't increase funding. It doesn't offer any more funding. It just ensures that money follows the child with regard to children who have special needs. From a systematic level, I appreciate CFO Hallett mentioning that there are working groups, and reading from a 2019 report from this fiscal allocation work group that CFO Hallett refers to on page 10 of the May 2019 document. The working group stated one of the cons of the current working solution is that with regard to determining current year allocations, there is potential for significant enrollment fluctuation and missing that fluctuation in the current year account. So I appreciate that the committee did a lot of hard work in finding the pros and cons, but what we've done with this bill, I see from the charter school perspective, is that this bill is going to address that con and ensure that money and funds that are allocated to children follow that child. Currently, children who are leaving the DOE going to charters show up at the charter school, and the money that was initially allocated to them stays in the DOE, and this bill would fix that. So thank you very much. I'm very much in support of this bill. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Teese. That's all I have on my Zoom list, unless there is someone else here that wishes to testify. If not, we have a number of individuals in support, including David Miyashiro from Hawai'i Kids Can, and a number of other supporters as well. Members, do we have any questions?
Chair, I have a question.
Representative Okimoto?
This might be for the charter schools as well as for the DOE. If you could familiarize me with, I'm familiar with what happens with the IDEA students under the DOE system, but if a special education student who leaves the DOE system and has their IDEA follow them, I'm not familiar with the charter school recommendation or requirements. Are you guys following the same IDEA requirements when the child goes into the charter school system? Could you familiarize me with that?
Yes, Representative Okimoto. Yes, we are subject to state and federal law with regard to supporting our children with IDEA eligibility. So our children who have special needs receive the same exact services as though they were in a public DOE school or a public charter school. Those services transfer. Right now, the funds to support those services do not transfer that year. A year later, they come in, should that child still be at the school, but the year that they come over, they're unfunded, and the money that is allocated to that individual child stays at the DOE school, even though the child, their services, the projected staffing needs, the resources, all of the wraparound services are expected to be provided to that child once they show up to the charter school. And that, I don't want to call it a burden because it's an opportunity for us to support an incredible child who's decided to come over to a charter school. The financial impact is severe, and we're just hoping that this bill allows for those funds to follow through and support those supports.
Thank you. Quick follow-up, Alex, if you don't mind. So when the child goes over to the charter school, what do you have statistics on the number of certified special education teachers and EAs or staff that are in the charter schools? Because I'm guessing for them to be, for their IEPs to be legitimate, they have to have the right personnel servicing them, correct? So do you guys have right now with the DOE has a shortage of special education teachers? What is it like in the charter school system?
Sure, I can't speak to all charter schools. I can only speak to our charter school specifically. So I use ours as an example, and perhaps it can be extrapolated. I sit on calls weekly with charter school leaders, and this is not just our issue. This is a broad issue. So I think that in a way we're a guinea pig for the issue because we're the newest charter school. So we're finding these inequities. Not that anyone has planted these inequities or wants these to happen, but they are just existing more prevalently in our situation. So for each year, a group of children who qualify for IDEA eligibility and who receive special education, there are certain staff members who would support them. Now, there's no minimum, say if you had 6 or 8 or 10 children, it all depends on their individual IEP. So with one child who has an IEP that has severe needs and requires a one-to-one and requires different services, perhaps that child has more special educators or one-to-ones or support services. And those are typically funded by funds that are allocated per what CFO Hallett was mentioning, which is a methodology called the Special Education Per Pupil Allocation. We call it the SPPA. And that SPPA allocates a certain amount of funds for a certain amount of special education eligible students. Depending on where those children are, depending on the staffing model of the charter school, depending on I'd say the philosophy of the charter school, whether it's inclusion, whether it's pullout, whether there's different ways to support and educate children from different charter school perspectives, there would be different staffing needs. In our case specifically, we have one special educator per grade because we have a cohort of 100 students. The first year we had 9 children who are IDEA eligible. The second year we had another 9. So for each cohort of 9 students, there's one special educator supporting these children.
Can I ask one more follow-up question? Is that okay, Chair?
Yes, Representative Okimoto.
Thank you. So if an IDE student comes to your school and you don't have the personnel or the services to meet that student's IEP, then what happens then?
That's not an option based on federal and state law. We have to find a way to make that happen. So what we've done this year, because we didn't receive funding for all of our children, we have 18 children and we only received funding for 9 children from our DOE allocation. We had to take money from our per pupil funding and other areas of our budget to ensure that we had the staffing to meet the needs of all of our children.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Representative Bellotti.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Hallett. So I'm new to this funding process, but I thought it was interesting in your testimony. Does the DOE have a data set as to what this 10% set aside has been allocated to per complex over time so that we can see where the inequities may or may not be?
Given that we're in our first year of implementation, and then the complex areas may still be holding some of that money, although they were encouraged to distribute to the schools as at least half of it during the planning phase and half of it over the course of this school year. Yes, we can provide that data.
But that seems to me that the 10% set aside is something that has been ongoing beyond just this work project. This was the mechanism you appear to have been using to ensure that funding would get to the charter school.
This was the mechanism that the fiscal allocation work group had recommended be used to take care of instances such as this. There was recognition of the shortcomings of having to use a single point in time formula or projection in order to make allocation decisions. We don't have the capacity or the mechanism to transfer money between schools with every adjustment or change in child by day that happens. So we have to pick certain points in time, and that's also how weighted student formula works. If I could just add 2 points of clarification, or that the funding we're talking about is what funds classroom positions, teachers, sped teachers, and EAs. It makes up approximately 60% of our special education budget. It's not for the contract service side. It's only for personnel. And the per pupil allocation amount is approximately $10,000 per student for this year. So just for context, what we're talking about. So I think if they were short 9 students, that's roughly $90,000. And we would look in part to the complex area to provide assistance.
A follow-up, just because you raised the fact that now you have separate pots of money. So do you also provide funding to charter schools for the contracted services that they may then require because of the IDA or that Representative Okimoto was referring to. So is there another additional set of funds for charter schools?
The Department of Education has responsibility for the special education services, and those funds are allocated to the complex area level and paid from that level of the organization for the charter schools under their jurisdiction.
And that would be charter. Okay, so the charter schools have access to the purchase of service contracts that may be for providers that are outside of the school system.
They should be providing or accessing assistance from those sources, correct?
And maybe can I just get verification that that's happening with this charter school leader we have on? Does that process happen?
Yes, that process has happened, and the DOE has been a tremendous partner in terms of providing those wraparound services. This specifically is talking about the SPPA and the amount that is allocated. And CFO Hallett is right. We're not talking about millions of dollars here. We're talking about tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars maximum. But for small charter schools, which a lot of us are, those are a couple positions. So that's a really big impact on us. And if there's a way for us to continue to work in partnership with the complex and the DOE to ensure that whether that's that 10% that's accessed, that would make a huge, huge difference. But I do want to be on record as saying the DOE has been an incredible partner in providing wraparound services and all of the additional supports that our children need and deserve.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you. Any other questions, members?
Yes, Chair.
Representative, oh no.
Hi, thank you for everyone being here. I'll start off with CFO Hallett. Good afternoon. Thank you for providing this thorough testimony. I just want to clarify a couple things. So the way the process works is that the enrollment count is locked in on April of this previous school year for the current school year. Did I get that right?
For planning, it's April of the previous year when they're doing financial plans, and then they do that in December, and then about 4 or 5 months later, when we have the new April count, that resets the projection, and then a few months later, the school year starts. So yes, you have that right.
In the link that you provided in your testimony, you mentioned that there's a adjustment in August of the current school year. I think that's what you might call the true up. Once that adjustment is in the books in August of the current school year, are there extra monies, or is there some sort of reallocation or true up of the funds as well, or is that just for your purposes for following students?
There's only the August adjustment, and that August adjustment is adjusting for the most recent April count and recalculation. So we load those adjustments July, August timeframe.
Are there any dollars that follow that adjustment that happens in August?
There's plus and minus adjustments. So schools do their financial plans based on a projected enrollment, which is based on the most current April count date we have at the time. And then we do a true up based on the next year's or a more current April count date, which is closer to the actual school year. When we did analysis of what was more accurate, or we found there was a pretty good projection. And one of the challenges is that over the course of the school year, schools tend to pick up or increase their enrollment of SPED students. That's why the fiscal allocation work group settled on using the April count date.
Okay, thank you. I think that you are clear in this testimony that this bill is inconsistent with the way that the per pupil allocation is currently conducted. It's inconsistent on purpose. That's the way it's written, because I think that there are ways that we can improve this. To Mr. Teese, the charter school leader who's on the call, have you had, as a result of your true up or those extra counts that are done and are more accurate, have you seen any dollars follow through with those?
We were actually asked to give money back this past year. So we were allocated funding for 9 students, even though we had 18 students who qualified for special needs. And we were asked to give part of that money back. So we gave back about 1/3 of that money. So it balanced out that we had about $60,000, which is funding for 6 students, about 1/3 of our special ed population. So yes, I am seeing that there are plus and minus adjustments. We have only been recipients of those minus adjustments as a charter school.
That's very unfortunate to hear. I do understand there's a working group and that there are different mechanisms. I hope you can seek help from the CAS and this bill in particular. Going forward, I do think that hearing from both the department and from this charter leader, there are kind of two stories that don't seem particularly congruent. So I do hope this bill continues its journey. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any other questions?
Vice Chair.
Chair Woodson.
Okay, thank you. This question is for Mr. Teese. He's still present. I'm just trying to crystallize, the discrepancies between the perceptions of actually what's happening on the ground. And it appears that DOE is in fact trying to accommodate this issue, but it's not, I would argue, where it needs to be. Their testimony articulates that there is in fact a 10% set aside that is allocated potentially at the CAS level to the schools. But you have just explained that in fact, that process did not work. And you had 18 students and you only received funding for 9 of those special education students. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair.
And so you believe that this proposal will remedy that particular challenge, which is pervasive throughout the charter school system?
It's pervasive throughout the charter school system, but particularly for new schools or for schools that are growing. CFO Hallett is spot on, and that April 30th is when the true up and when the snapshot is taken. However, children are still enrolled in DOE schools at that point. So the following fall, when those children actually enroll at their new charter school, on paper, because the paper is dated April 30th of the prior year, it appears as though those children are still in DOE schools. So while we were unfortunately recipients of much less funding, I feel that this bill will ensure that funds, again, no more, no less, but just flow through and follow the child, whether that DOE or charter. Same thing, if a child leaves a charter school, those funds should go back to the DOE and support the child wherever they may be receiving services.
Thank you. Well said. That this bill will make sure that funds flow through and follow the child. I think that encapsulates what we're attempting to do. All right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair Woodson. Members, any other questions? Representative Ganadin.
For Mr. Hallett? Can you hear me?
Yes. Hello.
Hi. For the students that were special education students, can you explain kind of what the process has been for the last year? I mean, so an IEP often requires a paraeducator, staffing, all kinds of requirements we just described. How's it been going throughout 2020? And have you been filling those positions? Ordinarily, paraeducators do one-to-one education with students. Can you just kind of explain basically just how it's been going?
Well, I'm certainly not the best person to be answering this question. What I can speak to, though, is I understand that our vacancies have been way down in our special education teacher lines, which has been tremendously helpful. But beyond that, I should defer to others to be responding to that kind of programmatic question.
I'm asking about the programs because it looks like you're going to be doing online education for some time to come. So
I think I'd like to request to defer to another office and have them follow up with you to give you a good and accurate picture of an assessment of how it's going with special education. I apologize. It's been very fluid and every school is slightly different.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, moving on to the next measure, House Bill 521. We have CFO Hallett, Department of Education, providing comments.
The department stands on its written testimony on this bill. I would note that we just do have a question on this bill about when the 30-day clock would start running because of the difference between when the Committee on Weights makes their recommendation versus when the Board of Education approves and passes and makes it official or adopts the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hallett. Members, any questions? Seeing none, Mr. Hallett was our only Zoom person and the only person to submit testimony, so we are moving on to the next measure, House Bill 612. Up first, we have the DOE, Mrs. Ushijima, providing comments.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Woodson, Vice Chair Capella, and members of the committee. I'm Terry Ushijima, again, Interim Assistant Superintendent, testifying on behalf of Superintendent Christina Kishimoto. The Hawaii Department of Education respectfully provides comments on House Bill 612. Given the existing board policy 500-18, providing the superintendent with discretion over summer school programming and the existing cross-office collaboration, we believe this measure is not needed at this time. We would defer to the Department of Human Services in regards to any restrictions placed on the federal funds administered by their department mentioned in this bill. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I am available to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ushijima. Up next, we have the Department of DHS providing both comments and support.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair Woodson, Vice Chair Capella, and members of the committee. My name is Kathleen Scardino. I'm a program administrator with the Department of Human Services, here to testify on behalf of Director Kathy Betts. The department stands on its written testimony and offered comments. We'll stand by to answer any questions from committee members. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Nicole Wu, Hawai'i Children's Action Network speaks in support.
Aloha, Chair Woodson, Vice Chair Capella. Thanks for this opportunity to testify. Hawai'i Children's Action Network Speaks supports this bill. We know that there's been learning loss due to the remote education over the past year, and that this adds up and exacerbates inequalities among different families. And summer learning programs have been proven in the past to be a really good way to help reduce those gaps between those kids who don't have as many resources as those who do have a lot of resources. So this bill would help just coordinate these programs better. The way they are now, they're kind of first come, first served. There are access gaps in those communities that need it the most. So the hope is having a centralized coordination system would make sure that those kids who really need the help are more likely to be able to get it, and that we don't have duplication of efforts as we've seen in the past. So again, we support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wu. Up next, we have Paula Adams, After School Alliance in support.
Hi, Chair Goodson, Vice Chair Capella, and members of the committee. My name is Paula Adams from the Hawaii After School Alliance, and we support the intent of the bill. And I'm here to answer any questions that you might have regarding summer programs. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Up next, we have Corey Rosenlee, HSTA, in opposition.
Thank you, Chair Woodson, Vice Chair Capella. HSTA opposes the HB 6112 in its current form. We have one specific provision that we have concern about. That is the provision that would be using CARES Act for summer school funding. The current DOE proposal proposes using $10 million for summer school funding and plans on another $53 million for private tutors. Our concern is right now we're trying to hire summer school teachers and private tutors. At the same time, the budget cuts 700 teachers approximately. So we cannot support that as long as this money is being used from the CARES Act and should be used instead to make sure that we avoid layoffs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenlee. That's all I have on the Zoom testifiers list. We have a number of other individuals both in support and providing comments. Members, are there any questions? Seeing none. Oh, Representative DeCoy. It's passed. Seeing no questions, we will move on to the next measure and back to Chair Woodson.
Thank you, Chair. Members, moving on to HB 791, Teacher Tax Credit for School Supplies and Materials. First up, we have the Department of Taxation providing comments.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members. Thank you. My name is Josh Michaels on behalf of the Director. We'll stand on our testimony offering comments.
Okay, thank you so much for being here. Next, we have Tax Foundation of Hawaii providing comments.
Thank you, Chair. Tom Yamachika from Tax Foundation. I hope you can hear me this time because I did a lot of technical changes on my side, and hopefully it works this time. Our comments are simply that, given the number of participants in this tax credit as opposed to the entire population, which would be affected if we needed new tax forms, new lines on the form and so forth. We think there are probably way more efficient ways of getting this done. I had raised in my testimony the possibility of giving, teachers a debit card of some kind. And I think that would be a way better and more efficient means of doing what needs to be done. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we have HSTA providing testimony and support. My apologies, HSTA is not here. We also have testimony from the Department of Education providing testimony in support. Is DOE here?
Yes, aloha, Chair Woodson, Vice Chair Capella, and Education Committee members. Cindy Covell, I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Talent Management. The department stands on its written testimony in support of this bill. Efforts to use a state tax code to offset expenses paid by teachers to support their classrooms would complement our efforts in teacher recruiting and retention. We defer to the Department of Taxation on any implementation concerns, but support the bill. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you for being here. We also have testimony, although not present, from the Democratic Party of Hawaii, providing testimony and support. Parents and Children Together also providing testimony and support. And that's all I have on my list. Is there anyone here wishing to provide testimony via Zoom? Seeing none, members, are there any questions? Okay, Vice Chair Cabela.
I have a question for HSTA.
Yes.
So specifically on this measure, I was wondering how much personal money is being spent by teachers on things like PPE because of COVID resource shortages?
We don't keep specific statistics on that. I will tell you that in past years, when we've asked teachers on surveys how much they spend out of pocket, teachers report hundreds of dollars, and some teachers report thousands of dollars that they spend out of pocket. I do know that teachers, in order to keep their room clean, are buying their own PPE gear, Clorox wipes, and other things to make sure that they try to keep their classes sanitized as best as they can.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Member, any other questions?
Thank you. I had a question. I wanted to comment, first of all, to Mr. Rosenly. I was one of those teachers, so I understand completely what you're saying. But I had a question for Tax Foundation for Tom. You mentioned the debit card. Could you explain to me exactly how that works? When I was in the education system, we were given purchase orders, and many times what made that difficult was we were given a purchase order for a specific location that we had to go to. We had an amount that we were given. So many times the things that we needed, the students that would come to me that their parents couldn't, or they weren't able to get the supplies necessary, I couldn't get them at the specific location that I had my PO for. So could you explain to me how the debit card system would work? Is it the same as a purchase order system? Because that to me had faults with it when I needed to get certain things for my students.
Yeah, thank you, Representative. What I had in mind, and again, it's just an idea that I had, is that some government agencies do give out benefits by either a debit card or something like it. EBT is one example, but some agencies actually have preloaded Visa cards or preloaded Discover cards, or whatever it is, and they are coded so that they can only be spent on certain things. So I mean, you wouldn't be able to buy a plane ticket with one, for example, and they would have a certain value amount, and then after you buy the stuff, you would need to come back to the office and attach the receipt and so forth. But at least you have your stuff, and you don't have to wait 6 months to get it.
So quick follow-up to that. If they you're saying they have to have qualified purchases, correct? Which makes sense. But what if they use a debit card and we find out later that the purchase was not a qualified purchase? Whereas on the other hand, if you do the reimbursement, which is a little bit more cumbersome because we have to wait for the lapse to get reimbursed, but you can qualify those purchases. How does that work if, and I'm not saying an educator would do this, but in the event where an educator maybe mistakenly purchased something and it wasn't a qualified purchase and it was on this debit card, instead of getting the tax credit where you show your receipts beforehand to get the credit.
Yes, I mean, in that instance, what would normally happen, I think, is, personnel or whoever would make a determination that this expense wasn't allowed, and the person involved would either pay the expense back or have it deducted from the pay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any other questions? Seeing none, moving on to the last bill, HB 1392, Department of Education CTE interns and exemptions. First up, we have Department of Education providing comments in support.
Good afternoon again, Chair Woodson, Vice Chair Capella, and members of the committee. I'm Terry Ushijima, Interim Assistant Superintendent with the Department of Education, testifying on behalf of Superintendent Christina Kishimoto. The Hawaii State Department of Education supports House Bill 1392, but defers to the Department of Labor and Industrial Relations regarding any adverse impacts which could result from the passage of this bill. This exemption will increase access to student internships that provide invaluable real-world work experience. As public high schools establish or expand their career and technical education programs of study, the department is committed to strengthening and advancing a concerted effort among the various partners to prepare students for the career pipeline and contribute to the vitality of Hawaii's workforce. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I am available for questions.
Thank you for being here, AS Ushijima. Next, we have DLIR providing testimony in opposition. DLIR.
Good afternoon, Chair Woodson, Vice Chair Capella, and members of the committee. This is Ann Eustachio, Director of Department of Labor. We stand on our written testimony in opposition of this measure, and we are here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Next, we have PCP, Pacific Resource Partnership, providing testimony and support. P here. PRP, sorry. Okay. Moving on to Hawaii Carpenters Apprenticeship Training Fund, providing testimony and support. This apprenticeship. Okay. Not present. Next, we have Hawaii Construction Alliance providing testimony and support. Is the Hawaii Construction Alliance here? Okay, we also have testimony from GCA in support, Youth Build Waimanalo in support, Hawaii Carpenters Apprenticeships Training Fund, again in support. And we have comments from a couple of individuals. That's all I have on my testifiers list. Is there anyone here wishing to provide testimony via Zoom?
Sure, Edmund Aksan, I just missed the video.
Okay, from Hawaii Carpenters Apprenticeship Training Fund, please provide your testimony.
Chair Woodson, Vice Chair Capella, and members of the committee, aloha. My name is Edmund Aksan, Executive Director of the Hawaii Carpenters Apprenticeship Training Fund. You have my written testimony, so I just want to highlight some of the key points. HCATF strongly supports House Bill number 1392, which exempts unpaid interns enrolled in the Department of Education program from the wage and hour requirements of employees on public works projects. However, we would like to offer an amendment to the bill. We suggest striking the word unpaid in order to extend this exemption to our paid interns who also assigned to public works project. HCATF currently runs a robust internship program as a part of our Career Connection initiative, which was launched in 2017 in partnership with the Department of Education's Career and Technical Education Office. Currently, we have 26 public high schools participating in this program. Our interns are paid a highly competitive rate, which is above minimum wage. However, contractors are further required to pay interns the prevailing wage, journeyman wage on public works project. any internship program will not succeed if contractors are forced to pay prevailing wages to interns and who are classified as apprentices and not yet qualified as journeymen. Given that both the federal and state initiative is to promote career development for high school students, we urge the committee to pass this exemption to encourage contractor participation and increase training opportunities. ACATF is committed to help building our community and future workforce. House Bill 1392 would help ensure the success of any internship program, encourage contractor participation, and ultimately provide increased opportunities for young job seekers to build fulfilling lifelong careers. Thank you for the opportunity to provide our testimony in strong support of House Bill 1392.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Is there anyone else here wishing to provide testimony for this particular proposal? Seeing none, members, are there any questions? Okay, Representative Gunnigan.
I suppose this is for the last testifier, Mr. Axon. Are you there?
HCATF, please.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. Go ahead, Representative.
Hey, good afternoon. Of course, many of us are in support of hands-on learning for students and for the opportunity to embark in a career in the trades. Can you explain the insurance practices for unpaid interns? So, as you're learning a trade, the possibility for injury is high. Who covers the possibility of loss? How does that work?
Yeah, and that is one of the purpose of this internship to minimize accidents or lower the risk for incoming apprentices, to provide them actual experience in a construction site. Most of the apprentices that coming in doesn't have any idea how the construction job site works, and they don't have training on how to handle equipment, how to properly handle materials. So this is one reason why we have the internship. On the insurance wise, they are covered by the workers' compensation by the general contractors who are assigned to these interns.
So the general contractors and prospectively the subcontractors, they are mandated by law to insure these interns. Is that correct?
That's correct. They are covered by their workers' comp insurance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any other questions? Okay, Majority Leader Bellotti.
Just a real quick question for Department of Labor. With the proposed amendments and the other testimony to strike unpaid, how strong is your opposition to this bill? Because it seems to me that this is a very limited exemption that actually addresses ensuring that we have a way to address our workforce shortage in this area of skilled trades.
Hi, Representative. Thank you for the question. And so we're very much opposed to this measure. It does not address apprenticeships. I know it was stated several times that these individuals are apprenticeships. We do have a schedule, a rate schedule for apprenticeships who can participate under the Chapter 104 public law projects. In this case, these are not apprenticeships. They're not in an apprenticeship program. They are just interns. And there is no federal alignment of a rate schedule for interns under Chapter 104. This is a public law project. If it was a private project, that would be a different matter. It wouldn't fall under 104, so there wouldn't be as many regulations that monitor and regulate the performance of services under 104, a public law project. And so we are highly, very, very strongly opposed to this measure.
Just a quick comment. I remain a little perplexed, and maybe I don't understand the federal rules enough, but I feel like there should be some flexibility because again, these interns are in a Department of Education program, so they're being overseen by individuals who've been vetted by the state agencies. And again, this is just addressing one of our needs. So I just leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Members, any other questions? I have a quick question for Department of Labor. Director, can you please quickly explain the rationale behind the federal statute defined as Davis-Bacon and then the state statute defined as baby Davis-Bacon?
Yes, Hi Chair, I will let the administrator from the Wage Standards Division address that question.
I'm sorry, can you please clarify the question?
What are the main provisions or what is the rationale behind the passage originally of Davis-Bacon on the federal level and what's referred to here in Hawaii as baby Davis-Bacon regarding Chapter 104? As you understand it, what's the rationale behind it?
So it's the level playing field when these contractors bid for these projects. And because we cannot be lower than what the federal Davis-Bacon rates are, we would have to be careful about, what we allow as student interns because the federal Davis-Bacon does not have that student intern classification.
Neither one speak to interns, right? Those laws are around workers, is that correct? To provide a prevailing wage for workers, is that correct? Is that how you understand it?
Right, there's no schedule representative for interns. There is a schedule for apprenticeship programs, certified apprenticeship programs, but these interns are not apprenticeship programs. They're not enrolled in the apprenticeship program.
The Director, my question was, does Davis-Bacon apply to workers? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. So as we heard in the testimony, these are actually educational programs. And the purpose of these educational programs is, as was mentioned, to get students interested in the field so that they can provide for their families and themselves as they enter out of high school, if they decide to go in that direction. You are stating that these students should be paid a journeyman's wage, which is a worker that's starting in the construction industry. And so I am too perplexed as to why you would oppose a proposal and disincentivize entities from partnering up with our DOE schools. Because what they are saying is if they have to pay these students prevailing wages, that they are simply not going to participate. And so you are in essence eroding our educational system.
Right, Representative, we don't dispute the fact that this is a great opportunity for these students. That's not what we are against in any way. We are truly against making sure that under this 104 chapter that we are following the alignment with the federal rate schedule. These individual interns are being paid, so they're being considered employees. And that's why they would also receive the worker comp benefit because they are employees. If they weren't employees, they would not fall under the requirements for workers' comp. And so that's another issue to keep them safe on the job site. So in no way are we against the fact that these individuals truly are benefiting from this program. We are not against that in any way. It's just that this is a 104 project, law, public works law. And if it was a private job, that would be a totally different story.
If this bill becomes law, are you able to promulgate rules to effectuate
Can you do that?
It's law.
If this bill becomes law, are you in compliance with federal statutes and that you can promulgate law? Yes. We would need to create a new classification and get alignment or approval from the federal regulations.
So you're able to do it.
We could try to do it. We would have to get approval to the feds and get approval for that rate schedule.
Thank you, Director. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your expertise. Members, any other questions? Okay, Representative Gunnigan.
To the DLIR, good afternoon. Following up on Chair Woodson's comments, I'm trying to figure out the differentiation between, for lack of a better term, the difference between white collar interns and blue collar interns. So the way that the state differentiates under 104 between kinds of interns that we employ here at the Capitol or in law firms or in educational facilities versus the kinds of interns that are being referred to in the testimony.
I'm not sure if I understand your question. I'm sorry, Representative. Do you want to know the definition of the Chapter 104 project?
What I'm wondering is how come it's quite all right for numerous public institutions to take on interns at a variety of different levels, unpaid, for the benefit of their education and the future of their careers, whereas this is receiving such significant opposition from the department.
It's just that under Chapter 104, there's specific regulations. That's the statute and how it reads. There's specific regulations, and even the federal oversight has their own alignment of regulations the states look to.
Okay, I'll follow up again later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, recess for DM. Recess. Thank you, members, reconvening for decision-making on several bills. First up, we have HB 11, Board of Education and Culturally Relevant Standards and Curriculum. Members, I would like to accept the BOE's recommendation for page 5, line 17 through 21. This is regarding curriculum and will make it applicable to the units of study. Besides that, defecting the date to July 1st, 2050. Questions, comments, concerns?
Can you repeat the amendment, please, Chair?
So on page 5, line 17 through 21, there is language around the curriculum. We're going to make it so that that language is just applicable to units of study per the board's recommendation, and then just simply defecting the date. Questions, comments, concerns? Vice Chair for the vote, please.
Voting on House Bill 11, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Chair and Vice Chair vote aye. Representative Belatti? Aye. Representative DeCoit?
Aye.
Representative Ganadin?
Aye.
Representative Gates?
Aye.
Representative Hashimoto?
Aye.
Representative Ono? Excused. Representative Quinlan? Excused. Representative Takayama?
Aye.
Representative Yamane?
Aye.
Representative Okimoto?
No vote, please.
No vote, Representative Okimoto. Chair, your measure is adopted.
Thank you, members. Moving on to HB 608, Board of Education and Community Forums. Again, members, I would like to take the board's recommendations in the third page of testimony. They give 5 recommendations, including making sure that there is written notice provided, that the meetings or the forums are open to everyone, that the board members will not be obligated or committed to anything discussed at the forums. And lastly, anything discussed at these forums will be reported out in the next board meeting. Besides that, technical non-substantive changes and effective the date to July 1st, 2050. Questions, comments, concerns? Vice Chair for the vote, please.
Voting on House Bill 608, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Chair and Vice Chair vote aye. Are there any noes? Are there any reservations? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, members. Voting on HB 611, Department of Education and Maintenance of Effort. Members, I want to make the language more consistent with regards to the trigger provisions. That language is found on page 4, lines 1 through 7, and also page 5, lines 9 through 3. We wanted to state that if appropriations to the department for the current fiscal year are less than the preceding year, the difference shall be deposited into the stabilization fund. And also, members, per some of the testimony provided by Hawaii Coalition, we want to incorporate a provision in there that says that all deposited funds shall be approved by the Board of Education before they are expended by the Department of Education. Technical non-substantive changes and effecting the date to July 1st, 2050. Questions, comments, concerns? Vice Chair for the vote.
Voting on House Bill 611, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Chair and Vice Chair vote aye. Noting the excused absences of Representatives Ono and Quinlan, are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, members. Moving on to HB 619, Department of Education and Ethnic Studies Curriculum, technical non-substantive changes and defecting the date to July 1st, 2050. Questions, comments, concerns? Vice Chair for the vote.
Voting on House Bill 619, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Chair and Vice Chair vote aye. Noting the excused absences of Representative Quinlan and Representatives Ono, are there any reservations? Any noes?
No vote, please.
No vote, Representative Okimoto. Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, members. Moving on to HB 1222, Department of Education and Computer Science. Members, on page 8, line 1, we're going to strike out that requirement. The rest of the requirements are pretty pro forma, but the reporting requirement as it relates to reporting the degree attainment by the teacher, that might be a little bit too disruptive to set up. We're going to take that out. Also, per DOE's testimony, we want actually the correct definition to reflect the national standard. That's more of a technical change. We'll just add a couple words to reflect that national standard. Besides that, other technical non-substantive changes and defecting the date to July 1st, 2050. Questions, comments, concerns? Vice Chair for the vote, please.
Voting on House Bill 1222, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Vice Chair and Vice Chair vote aye. Noting the excused absences of Representative Ono and Quinlan, are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Vice Chair Capella.
Voting on House Bill 1294, Vice Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. On page 2, line 13, we will be adding the phrase completed intent to enroll form. And on page 3, lines 2 to 3, we will be adding in the phrase receipt of intent to enroll form to ensure that the transfer of funds called for by this bill is completed in time for charter schools to acquire any additional special education services that may be necessary to support SPED students who transfer. Also noting on page 3 at the end of line 8, just to clarify that the funds being transferred are intended to support special education needs, we are going to be adding the following language after the words charter school. The language will be provided further that the allocation transferred shall be used for special education services. Members, are there any discussions? Seeing none, Chair Woodson for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members voting on HB 1294. The Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments, noting the excused absences of Representatives Quinlan and Ono. Are there any noes or reservations? Seeing none, Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, Chair. Moving on to House Bill 521. For this measure, Vice Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. On page 3, lines 7 to 9. I'm recommending that we insert language to clarify that the report be submitted to the legislature within 30 days of the Board of Education approving any changes to the weighted student formula. Members, are there any discussions? Seeing none, Chair Woodson for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members voting on HB 521, the Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments, noting the excused absences of Representatives Quinlan and Ono. Are there any reservations or nays? Seeing none, Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Moving on to House Bill 612. For this measure, Vice Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. On page 1, we're going to strike out the lines 12 through 15 so that subsection B will simply read, the summer learning coordinator shall work with the Department of Human Services to leverage federal funds. Is there any discussions on this, members? Seeing none, Chair Woodson for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members voting on HB 612. The Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments, noting the excused absences of Representatives Ono and Quinlan. Members, are there any reservations or no's?
Reservations, please.
Duly noted.
Reservations noting the testimony of cases.
Thank you. Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Wonderful. Thank you. And now turning back to Chair Woodson.
Thank you, members. Moving on to HB 791, teachers, tax credit, and supplies and materials. Members, we would like to take the Tax Foundation's recommendation with regards to eligibility, making sure that this is applicable to not only kindergarten teachers, but pre-K through 12th grade, and that these educators work at least 900 hours per school year. That makes it so that they're full-time educators. Besides that, defecting the effective date to July 1st, 2050. Members, questions, comments, concerns? Vice Chair for the vote, please.
Voting on House Bill 791, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Chair and Vice Chair vote aye. Noting the excused absence of Representatives Ono and Quinlan, are there any reservations? Any no's? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, members. Moving on to HB 1392, DOE exemptions and interns. Per the testimony, we will delete the word unpaid. That will give these entities more flexibility, defecting the date to July 1st, 2050. Questions, comments, concerns? Vice Chair for the vote.
Voting on House Bill 1392, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Chair and Vice Chair vote aye, noting the excused absence of Representatives Ono and Quinlan. Are there any reservations? Any no's? Chair, your resignation is adopted.
Thank you. Adjourn.